this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Hello and welcome to the podcast, everybody. Christopher Ohms is our special guest today. He's a San Francisco Bay Area native and serves as Director of Supply Chain at Rigel Pharmaceuticals. Prior to joining Rigel, Ohms held positions at Gilead Sciences, Patheon, Stanford School of Medicine, Pain Therapeutics, and Alza. His 27-year career in the medical and pharmaceutical setting has been in quality, project management, research, development, commercial operations, manufacturing, packaging and labeling, supply chain, sales and operations planning, and global clinical commercial contractor relationships. Ohms has co-authored 8 patents and holds a BS in biology and a master's in English literature. And with that, I'd like to welcome Chris Ohms to the show. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, Don. Thank you for having me on the show. Very much appreciate it.
You're welcome. And I look forward to our conversation. This should be a great conversation about project management and other things that you've worked on. First, can you tell me just a little bit about yourself? So, tell me a little about your career and your interests and some of the things that you've been writing about.
Yeah, so I'm a Bay Area native, Don. I've been in the industry for about 30 years. I started off at a company called Alza Corporation many years ago, and Alza was a drug delivery company that later got acquired by Johnson & Johnson. Not to go through my entire ups and downs of my career, but I left Alza and I then went to go work at Stanford School of Medicine with one of our VPs who was also a dean of the school. And then following that, I did a little stint at Oracle Corporation. Their headquarters are located not too far from where I live in the Bay Area. And then from there, in no particular order, I worked at Genentech and Gilead, and I worked at a small company called Pain Therapeutics, Elon, another small company called ADDS Pharma, and now more recently I'm at Rigel Pharmaceuticals in South San Francisco. So I've worked from the San Francisco area down to close to San Jose area along the peninsula most of my career.
Fantastic. And then in terms of interests, I noticed that you've done quite a bit of publishing. So what led you to writing, especially for outsourced pharma?
Yeah, so while I was getting my undergraduate degree, I did take a lot of reading and writing courses. I did get my graduate degree in English literature and technical writing. And one of the things I've found in our industry is you have a lot of well-educated people from all parts of the world, some of which don't have really good command of the English language. And so this English skill helped in either writing publications or updating reports, technical reports in particular, as needed. And I do read all the time. I'm an avid reader. I'm reading less now because of just general workload, but I do enjoy reading. And it's no joke amongst my friends that in a bookstore, I tend to go to the reference section first and then the science section second, and you can spend hours there. And then I just felt like a lot of the experiences I've had were relevant for people that may be coming into our industry or relatively new to our industry. And I attended a few symposiums at Stanford, which then sparked my interest in writing because I felt that was a good vehicle for communicating. And a lot of what we're doing now in our industry is outsourcing. So whether we're outsourcing manufacturing or outsourcing packaging and labeling or even warehousing, distribution, and logistics, but collectively, we're doing more outsourcing, and some of the works I've written about or topics I've written about, I think are pertinent for, again, any number of people in the industry.
So with that, you recently wrote an article for Outsourced Pharma titled 4 Skills an Exceptional Project Manager Can't Survive Without. And in there, you highlight 4 key skills that you feel are sort of foundational: respect for others, knowing when to intercede, recognition that details drive success, checking your work and maintaining focus. I guess where I would start with my questions here would be, so in your biotech roles, have you frequently interfaced with project managers?
I have. I actually, again, going back to my beginning of my career, I had a period where I was a project manager or a program manager. And so we had a PMO. So we had the formal project management office with the leadership and so forth, the project managers and project coordinators. If you look at the PMBOK or the Project Manager Body of Knowledge, or you look at the PMI, Project Management Institute, these kinds of routines are pretty well defined. And so they're the foundation upon which most project managers look to get certification. I think I predate them, the formation of that. Anyway, so as a project manager, I knew what worked for a lot of the people I worked with or worked for, a lot of our stakeholders. I'm grateful to say that I had a good exposure to a wide variety of projects that were largely technical and based. And over time, as I moved off of that into some other roles and responsibilities in different companies, I did work with project managers. And again, some of them were more scientific based. Some had strengths in regulatory or quality, or just strictly pure project management. And I did get to work with a variety of these folks. And again, in small companies, big companies, tech companies, private institutions. So the flavors of project management were fairly diverse. And the topics I mentioned in the article are those key takeaways I felt really identify some of the better skill sets that a project manager should have, at least in our industry.
It does seem like as organizations try to scale, if they're small, the project management plays a big role. And then also, as you get to the bigger corporations, it's almost like they can't survive, but without project management, but also they have a lot of varying ways to deliver project management as well. So you do run into varied skill sets that are out there.
I was going to say adaptability, right? So companies, their organizations, they grow, they expand. If they're successful, they grow faster than others. And functional groups like project managers, the skill sets, the tools, the techniques are also ones that need to be adapted around the growth. What you do for one company or organization doesn't necessarily fit the other organization for various reasons. And so you'll hear, this is how we do it at company X, this is how we do it at company Y. And my response to that is, that's really good for company X, company Y, but this is company Z. It's a different company, and you have to look at how the project management skills you bring to the table need to be adapted into the culture. So that's presuming, again, they have the basic skills and the understanding of what project management really is. Again, going back to the PMI, for example. So
that's a great place to lead us back to that first item in your article. So if respect for others is one of the first things that you talked about, can you explain a little bit about what you would envision good looks like in terms of respect for others from a project manager?
Yeah, one for me is communication, allowing your team members to communicate their points. You're going to, in again, a global community or certainly a global company, you're going to have people of different gender, different cultures, different experience bases, even different understandings of what the project is about. They may have very specific knowledge in their area, and they have little knowledge of the other areas. And so one of the things for project managers can do is they can get frustrated. So not sharing that frustration and maintaining a degree of respect and helping all stakeholders, I think, is paramount. It's too easy to be short, be curt, or to be disrespectful in the interest of being efficient with team members in order to move the needle or to move the program along. There's a bit of, again, I don't want to say empathy, or there's a bit of empathy or consideration that when a project manager exhibits these types of skills or qualities, that's what good looks like. The other aspect of that is knowing how to do that well and not be pretentious or artificial about it.
It's a great point. And just being able to maybe at least understand kind of all sides is what I also hear you saying. So the project manager might have a deadline, the project overall or the corporation may have a deadline, but also in typical functions, we often see that the people have other responsibilities other than the one project that they're delivering it, and maybe being a little understanding towards that as well. I hear you also saying in your statement.
Yeah. Sometimes organizations, the project manager doesn't just have that project manager hat. They have that hat plus a number of other hats. They may be smaller allocations of their time. Transitioning from one hat or one job to another and back to the other can be a bit arduous for any one person. A lot of responsibility does fall on the project manager. The other part I would say is sometimes project managers have to prod, poke, remind given stakeholders more than others for updates to maintain adherence to a schedule or deliverable. And those are somewhat invisible to many people, but they're there, and they're there quite often in any given project. Some organizations don't care. They just want the end result. They don't want to hear any excuses. Just get it done. But the reality is, again, this is one thing you're managing isn't just your tasks. You're managing people who are executing those tasks. So you have to be respectful of the people that you are working with. So it's really managing the people or the person. And if you have that good relationship or can foster that good relationship, then in my experiences, you'll tend to have good results in a project that maintains its schedule and its adherence to quality and cost. So it's a bit of art coupled with psychology, if you will, and science.
The next 2 points in your article really focus in on knowing when to intercede and then recognition that details drive success. They seem to focus in on good facilitation skills in my mind. They focus much more on understanding how to extract the best out of people and also understanding that you've got to have a certain level of expectation around the level of detail that a project manager is going to get to as well. But I just wanted to explore each one individually to start with maybe. So have you seen project managers intercede at the right time? And then also maybe what does the counterpoint look like for that as well?
Yeah, I have. There was one I worked with not too long ago at one of those companies I mentioned in my history, and she was exceptional. She held a PhD. She had a scientific background, and she understood the science of pharmaceutics, and she understood the science, and she understood the touch points in developing or advancing a product through regulatory quality, QC, all the other various touch points. But in her project management role, she was very clear with everybody. She set expectations right at the very beginning. Meetings start on time and meetings end on time. And I ask that you come prepared to the meeting and that you're not umming and ahhing and fumbling through the questions or the responses that are in the action items. And as conversations evolve or develop in the meeting, then commit to a time when you can get back and give an answer. It doesn't have to be in that same meeting necessarily, but be clear in your thoughts and be clear in your mind. And the way she did it was elegant, and it was clear, and it was well understood. It wasn't done in a disrespectful or disorganized fashion. And she also knew when to pace certain topics ahead of others. So if something was much more critical for the success of the project, then she would front load that in the meeting. Things that were less critical that potentially could slip off of that day's agenda could move into the next meeting that was scheduled. So she had a good understanding of what was important and what wasn't as important. On the other side of that, I've had a project manager that we were involved in a richly scientific discussion. So the participants of this meeting were scientists of various degrees. You had medicinal chemists, you had formulation scientists, you had analytical chemists, you had packaging engineering, you had various scientific-centric disciplines. And while the agenda may have included the issuance of purchase orders or follow-up from action items that were non-scientific, this project manager was hell-bent on staying to the agenda and clicking away at it as was prescribed prior to the meeting. And so if 5 minutes was allowed to discuss formulation update, at 5 minutes, she would stop the conversation and move into the next agenda topic. Formulation development, depending on the size, depending on the type or the time of the evolution of a given pharmaceutical product, can take on a hydra. You can take on conversations that This is the point of the meeting. You're sharing ideas and technical data and updates. And so 5 minutes, while it may have been nice in the agenda, sitting in an office and saying, okay, I'm going to carve out 5 minutes of time, it ends up that it took 15 or 20 or 25 minutes. And around the 20-minute mark, this project manager became very curt with, these are, again, leadership people in scientific disciplines. She became very curt and said, we need to move on. And they weren't going to have it. We weren't going to have it. It was a conversation with, again, a multiple number of people in the scientific fields who didn't really care about the POs and didn't care about where we were with meeting minutes. They cared about the science and doing good scientific work that was compliant, safe, efficacious, and so forth. And so in this example, again, the project manager persisted to try to cut off the conversation that was flowing between the different parties and ultimately walked out of the room because she was frustrated. I just didn't get a sense that she understood that sometimes meetings do take an organic route, and it's okay. It's okay that they do because of the topic that's being discussed. She also didn't avail an opportunity for another meeting where a subset of these folks could have later, maybe tomorrow or the next week. And so rather, she just became frustrated and left the meeting. So that's the bad example, if you will.
So the project manager left the meeting. Is that right?
Yes, she did. Yeah, she did. Yeah.
Interesting. And in terms of maybe experience that, say, project manager number one versus project manager number two, do you just believe that the background of the individuals was different, or the training of the individuals was different, or maybe even the experience level of the individuals was different that led to that?
I don't know, Don. That's a fair question. Both held or hold PhDs. The second was certified, a PMP certified individual, so she knew the formal routines. The other wasn't PMP certified, but she's read the PMBOK. She's participated in these kinds of seminars on project management. I just think that there's a maturity that came with the first one that didn't come with the second one. And there's the ability to maintain the frustration that she was having. The second one, in the example I gave, just wasn't there. And so she was definitely more interested in maintaining the order of the agenda versus what was being discussed at the meeting. And again, it goes back to what I said with the first one, the first project manager, is she knew well enough to say, let's give this topic a little more time, and we'll just have to move the topics at the bottom of the agenda into another conversation and so forth.
And then knowing that most PMs are inquisitive and detail-oriented people, how can an exceptional PM draw out the details for the team as well? Where have you seen this capability to just continue to help teams get to a point where they have a better understanding of the details for success?
I think if a project manager knows the regulations, or they know the science, or they know the routines, it can always help the teams that don't have all that knowledge. So you might have somebody who doesn't know the CFRs. So if they could just give a 30-second background why this is relevant, it'll help.
And also being able to maybe ask questions and just say, hey, look, I don't understand this area. Can you help me understand as well? Might be another possible way to help the team.
I tend to dissuade some of that only because if a PM gets out of their lane and gets into a series of questions, meaning they don't know why we do stability, or what's ICH mean, or how long do we need to have this on stability, or how do we qualify reference standards? If you get into all those kinds of what-if questions, or why do we do roller impaction, or what is spray drying, it can become a bunch of questions that certainly can be answered by the SMEs or subject matter experts in the room, but maybe there's a time and place separate from a cross-functional conversation to have that with PM outside of the meeting itself. And that's okay to ask a few questions, but I think there's a limit on that. And that being said, team members also get into those what if questions. What if it's a Monday batch versus a Tuesday batch? They're different days. Aren't they there for different batches? And you go, no, the whole point of validation, for example, is to say that we make it the same way repeatedly, and based upon these data, whether it's a Monday batch or a Tuesday batch, they are basically equivalent batches. And so if that kind of question came up out of a team member, the project manager needs to find an elegant way to cut it down, stop it from bleeding or stop it from getting into these kind of wild conversations. So I think there's some room for inquisitiveness, but I would say the room for inquisitiveness is pretty small. Because again, in my experiences, project meetings are meant to move things along. Let's talk about certain topics, address certain action items, and keep progressing the project forward. And if there are things that came up, a risk or a situation, an issue, then let's talk about those as well. But if there's other things you want to ask, let's take it offline and talk about them.
That very much ties into your second point. So the knowing when to intercede, but also understanding a little bit of your environment and the fact that you're dealing with people that really do understand a lot about their own background, and your questions may not be ones that necessarily move the project forward. So thank you for that.
Yeah. I've been on projects where certain individuals want to focus just on their topics, and they want to spend, in a 1-hour meeting, they want to dominate the meeting for 45 minutes. In some ways, some people want to pontificate. They want to hear themselves speak. They want to ask a bunch of questions of other departments or other functional groups that aren't relevant to the project itself. They're not germane to the project. They may be germane to the culture. They may be germane to the relationship. But usually I take those, in my experiences, as these are people that don't get information from their own departments, and therefore they're using the project meeting as a medium for information that they don't get naturally. And again, these are things that are off topic. The other thing I will say that different cultures, when you have a meeting where you're involving people from, let's say, Brazil or South Africa or China or Germany, and folks from Texas and New York and California, you have a very wide variety of cultural differences going on there. So one of the other elements a project manager needs to do is quickly glean from these different cultures where they are, what the nuances of them are, and manage the project and make sure that if there is a conversation that's going on with all these different cultures, is to respect that culture, but also don't get trapped into any one of them to distract from the goals of the project, the tasks, the deliverables of the project itself. And again, I've seen sometimes that can happen, and the better project managers are able to navigate that pretty quickly and pretty well.
Global cultural understanding isn't necessarily an easy thing to fully understand, but also from a project management standpoint and really focusing on sort of the output, if we're hitting our deliverables, are something that can easily be something that you could tactically walk your way through, but also understanding that cultures around the world are different, and the reason why somebody may or may not achieve something may not necessarily just be the work of the one individual. There may be either people up above you if you were in certain cultures, or maybe there might be a reason socially why I can't express certain things. That's right. Not an easy thing to work through, for sure. Yeah.
That's right.
And then the final point in your article, I'm going to go back to this last point as well, is just checking your work and maintaining focus. Is just really about watching the details in the project plan, or is it something more?
It's probably both. It's knowing when you develop a plan, the plan is subject to change. It's going to change as you complete activities and as you evolve into a project. If it's something that you've never done before and there's no frame of reference, then it's certainly going to have the opportunity for change. And so the more attentive to the details you are, the better your ability to be nimble, to take that change on and not jeopardize the schedule, whether it's, again, the schedule or the cost, and certainly not the quality. It can be both. But in my mind, when I was writing the article, I was thinking about project managers that may do cookie cutter approach at certain things, and then they just don't really get into the particulars of any given functional groups. On the other extreme, and I know this from my own experiences many years ago, I think one of my project plans, I got into half-hour or half-day type of activities. And I learned that was way too detailed. I spent more time not only crafting the project plan and trying to manage that level of detail, but it wasn't well appreciated. And in fact, it wasn't needed. So I know from my own experiences that you can get to be too detailed in your approach. And so there's, again, finding that balance of, you don't want to do something that has a 1 year type of milestone. You want to do things as they're relevant to the project and relevant for the organization that's supporting the work. You want to be able to give your team members proper updates and manage expectations, but you also want to manage above you. You want to manage the leadership that has an interest in the project and know how to distill that from the project plan or the meeting minutes or action items or whatever mechanism or vehicles that people use.
For sure. Yeah. And just having that right level and right touch is absolutely critical. I've certainly seen project plans that have thousands of lines in them, of which nobody really wants to spend any time updating all of that level of detail. But at the end of the day, we need to know things like, has stability been done? Yes or no?
Right.
And down to that level of execution is absolutely critical in the project, and kind of understanding how to navigate that is something that's not easy, and it does take a little bit of finesse.
Yeah, it does. And there's other work streams that may be outside of the per se the project that have touch points into the organization. One of the more current and more recent situations is CPV, continuous process verification. 10 years ago was maybe a conversation, now it's a regulation. If you're doing a project and it starts to take root and take off, is how do you rope that work stream or that product into the other ongoing work streams around CPV, for example? The connection between the output of a given product or project could be an input into another larger program. So the level of detail and using stability or using stability as an example, there might be certain key time points that support an NDA report or CPV program, but there's outside of the per se deliverable, it may have other touch points to, again, these other work streams.
I have to thank you for the article. It definitely got me thinking about different things that I've seen in my own life in terms of exceptional project managers that do great work. And I too feel like I've interfaced with quite a few people that have been on the exceptional side, and then other people that really could take some of these tips and say, how could I do it maybe differently? So hopefully we'll get some folks that walk away with some things to think about as well.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, it was fun to write it, and I was grateful that it got out there. And again, I appreciate your time and interest on the podcast. I hope it helps other people.
What are you working on next? Are you willing to talk about any of your upcoming writings?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm working on an article that's centered around innovation. I don't know if I've finalized my thoughts around it. Again, I'm trying to ground where does innovation touch us, probably in the contract space, whether it's contract manufacturing or contract packaging. And it's too easy, certainly where we live around here, to get into artificial intelligence and novel medical interventions and things that are interesting reads, but definitely outside of my experience space. So I'm trying to fine tune a few things around innovation in our space. So that's the next article that's coming out.
Okay. And one series of questions that I like to ask every guest, what inspires you?
That's pretty straightforward for me, and it's the patient. It's taking care of the patient. I grew up working in a drugstore prior to going into pharma, and one of the things that I took pleasure in, or I looked forward to, is helping people. at a drugstore, you get people that are sometimes sick and they need medication. So they go back to the pharmacist and they pick up their script. And the other thing I will say from a personal perspective, I took care of my mother and up until her passing. And again, when I looked at how she aged and had to run to the hospital and ultimately get medication, there was some situations where the medication wasn't in the shelf, wasn't in the pharmacy's possession. And so I see my role and my team members' roles as we're here to help get that medication to the patient. So that's what inspires me to do what I do.
What concerns you?
That sometimes we lose focus. I think sometimes people are rather perfunctory in their work and they lose focus that we're in this industry to help people and bring your best game and bring your respectful self and maintain that focus. How can we help the patient? How can we help make sure the patient gets the best treatment they can from whatever culture or company you're working with? It doesn't matter if you're a big company or a small company, but sometimes there can be a perspective of the person on your team isn't thinking that way. And that's a little bit of a concern. So that concerns me.
Last question. What excites you?
A couple things. I would say getting a job done well, and I think working with the team. I think one of the things I've liked over the last 30 years is the teamwork. I recognize that while I'd like to read and do my own thing, I really like the vibe that comes from a cross-functional team with a shared objective or a shared set of goals, and that's exciting. That's one of those, when you can have that and you can charge ahead, and you're having fun doing it too. If you can have fun in meetings and outside of the normal routine work, and you're moving that needle, moving that project along, and as a team, and you're earnestly enjoying each other's company, that's some of the best things you can have in your career. So those are the things I look for more so now than before.
Thank you so much for those. I greatly appreciate it. I love hearing from different leaders how they answer those three questions. And we're all obviously different. We have different perspectives, and it's great to always hear how people go through those. How can people get in touch with you if they want to try and reach out to you?
I'm on LinkedIn, and at the base of my LinkedIn profile is my phone number. I have my phone with me often.
I'll add some links to a link to your article. I'll make sure that there's a link to your LinkedIn profile as well. Thank you so much, Christopher Ohms, for being with us today and sharing all your thoughts around project management and what makes an exceptional project manager. I couldn't thank you enough for being on the show. So thanks.
Thank you, Don. Very much appreciated the time, and look forward to working with you again.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it. And last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.